Yeah, we've got availability tonight at 7:30. See you then. Hello there, and welcome back to the final couplet with me, Theo Cowan. We're on to Sonnet 71, and I did look ahead a little bit today, you'd be pleased to hear, and this is a two-parter. So buckle up for 2 episodes. Obviously, Sonnet 72 will be next week, but just so you know in your head that it will follow on from 71. Often in the past I haven't looked ahead, so I didn't know that it was a 2-part or even a 3-part sonnet. So good to see that I've done my homework this week. So give me a nice pat on the back when you see me next. Now, just to recap Sonnet 70 last week, it was all about, when you're so hot and you're so good looking that people say bad things about you behind your back and they are mean to you. And we discussed this last week, but I've had a week to reflect, and I think Shakespeare's just totally wrong here. Good looking people get all the good things in life, and really there aren't that many repercussions, I'd say. But if you don't agree with me, feel free to challenge me. This is an open discourse. Give me a little message on Spotify to let me know. Or email me. Anyway, I think it's about time we take a look at Sonnet 71. No longer mourn for me when I am dead. Then you shall hear the surly, sullen bell give warning to the world that I am fled from this vile world with vilest worms to dwell. Nay, if you read this line, remember not the hands that writ it. For I love you so that I in your sweet thoughts would be forgot. If thinking on me then should make you woe. Oh, if, I say, you look upon this verse when I perhaps compounded am with clay, do not so much as my poor name rehearse, but let your love even with my life decay. Lest the wise world should look into your moan and mock you with me after I am gone. Now, this is a bit of a classic one, I think. I've heard this one before. I've heard it read out loud, and I think I have read it myself. So that's when you know it's one of the classics. And the long and short of it is, look, when I'm dead, don't mourn. Don't mourn me, because actually that'll just make you really sad, and I'd hate to see that. That's the overall meaning. Obviously, there's a lot of nice imagery and use of words. Also, some interesting choices of words. I'd say vilest. Is that a word? Maybe back then, but obviously vilest I don't think is a word now. I've just looked it up actually, and obviously not a word now, but back then viled and vile meant the same thing. And vile, of course, means the same thing it does today. So there's a little bit of learning for you. And the other thing that jumped out at me was in the final couplet, does he try to rhyme moan with gone? And if he is trying to do a rhyme there, which the jury's out on that, he might not be, but if he is, then it suggests that maybe gone was pronounced more of a gone type thing back then. Which actually makes a little bit of sense when you look at how it's spelt. It looks more like a gone than a gone. Right, let's dive into this line by line and find out what the hell Shakespeare was going on about in Sonnet 71. So we start with quite a long thought here. No longer mourn for me when I am dead. Then you shall hear the surly sullen bell give warning to the world that I am fled from this vile world with vilest worms to dwell. It's a long one. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? But the essential meaning here, I think, is, look, when I'm dead, only mourn for me as long as you hear the funeral bell, telling the world that I've left this vile world. Interesting that he uses vile there. He's obviously not happy with the world at the moment, at the time of writing. To go live with vile worms. So, look, don't mourn for me forever. Just mourn for me as long as you hear that bell tolling out. So not long really, because back in Shakespeare's day they did ring a bell at the church, the funeral bell, to announce that someone had died. And there were a lot of deaths back then, so that bell must have been going crazy. And also, how do you know that one person has died and the funeral bell's rung for them, but then what if another person dies quite soon afterwards? How do you know that the funeral bell isn't still ringing for the first person? So that's a question, isn't it? Maybe they had a sort of interim bell, a second bell that they rang that was maybe a different tone to announce the sort of ending of the first bell. I'm probably overthinking it. Anyway, essentially what he's saying in these first 4 lines is that don't mourn for me longer than you hear that bell, which is not a very long time. Once the bell stops ringing, do not mourn for me. Alright, you got that? Then he continues with, nay, if you read this line, remember not the hand that writ it, for I love you so that I in your sweet thoughts would be forgot, if thinking on me then should make you woe. So here he's saying, if you read this line in this sonnet, don't remember who wrote it, alright? Because I love you so much that I'd rather you forgot about me than think about me and feel all sad. So he's saying, look, just forget about me because it's only going to make you really sad and depressed to remember me. So this is how much I love you. I love you so much that I'm telling you to forget me. It's quite a poetic... Well, it's a good job he's a poet, isn't it? But it's a very poetic line. And I think this is one of the few that if I received, I'd go, oh, wow, that's good, isn't it? He's saying that he cares about me and loves me so much that he doesn't want to see me sad. He doesn't want to see me remember him with sorrow. No, he wants me to forget. It's also, I guess, a little bit arrogant, isn't it, to say, look, I know that when I die, you're going to be really upset. You're going to be mourning. You're going to be really having the worst time. Because what if his lover's just sort of waiting for him to die? And it's like, oh God, thank God Shakespeare's dead. Now I can get on with my bloody life. And he continues with, oh, if I say you look upon this verse when I perhaps compounded am with clay, do not so much as my poor name rehearse, but let your love even with my life decay. Now usually I like to do these breakdowns sort of line by line, but these are just sort of chunks. They're very clear chunks of thought, and they're all in sort of 4 or 5 lines, so sorry if it's a little bit longer than you're used to in these sonnets, but it makes sense to keep them in these chunks, I think. So here he's sort of continuing on from the same thought as last time about his lover reading his poetry after he's died. And he's saying, look, if you read this poem when I'm compounded into clay, which is a nice way of saying dead, don't say my name. Don't even utter my name. But let your love die with me. So it's the same thought. And he's saying, look, if you're reading these lines back, don't even say my name out loud. Don't think about me, and let your love for me die with me. So once I'm dead, that's it. Move on. It's over. Don't even think about me. Don't say my name. Get on with your life. Easier said than done, I'd say. Nice to put down in a poem, but in practice, I'd say virtually impossible. And now, of course, we're on to the final couplet. Lest the wise world should look into your moan and mock you with me after I am gone. Which means, look, if you are mourning me after my death, then the world will investigate your moans. It'll hear your moans, and it'll go, hold on a second, what's going on there? Who's moaning? And will use me, Shakespeare, to mock you after I am gone. So I think in essence what he's saying here is that the world will hear you crying and moaning about Shakespeare and will then mock you and make life really hard for you now that he's dead. So if you keep on moaning and crying about the death, then the world is gonna use that death to mock you. And you're gonna be miserable for the rest of your bloody life if you keep moaning. So there we have it, Sonnet 71. And I like the meaning behind it. I think, it's lovely that he's saying, look, when I'm gone, just forget about me. Let your love for me die with me. I think that's quite a beautiful message. Obviously, as I've said earlier, it's easier said than done. And I think the recipient of the poem is going to have a really tough time putting that into practice. But it's a nice sonnet to receive. And also, it would make you question, hold on, are you planning on dying sort of soon? Or because the way you're writing this sort of makes it seem like you're on your deathbed. So, or is this just in preparation for when you might die years from now? Couple of questions about that. Right, I think it's about time we put this to our story. And if you'll remember last week, Shakespeare had delivered Sonnet 70 to Christopher Marlowe about all Christopher Marlowe's friends on the island of Barbados just being quite shitty about him and saying bad things about him just because he's good looking and sort of taking the piss out of him. And he's saying, look, just because you're good looking, you shouldn't stand for this. And Christopher Marlowe is sort of coming to a vague realisation that maybe Shakespeare's right. And they're on the beach. Shakespeare is on a boat to get out of Barbados. So the question is, will Christopher Marlowe join him on the boat? Let's find out. Shakespeare finishes reading Sonnet 70 to Christopher Marlowe. Chrissy looks up at Shakespeare. Shakespeare's much taller than Christopher Marlowe, apparently. And he says, Shakespeare, I can't believe it, you're right. How have I been so blind to this? Of course they're taking the piss out of me. They're joking behind my back, and all because I'm so bloody good looking. It's not on, is it? And Shakespeare says, yeah, it's not on. And Christopher Marlowe turns round to his supposed friends on the beach of Barbados and he says, hey, you lot, what's your problem? You've been really mean to me and you've been leading me astray, actually, and you've been making me do bad things and say bad things about the people that I actually love, like Willie over here. And they all start to laugh and smirk and nudge each other and say, yeah, right. As if, Chris. Look, you go off with Shakespeare if you want to, but you'd be leaving paradise and all your mates. And Chris says, I realise who my real mates are, and they're not on this island. Come on, Shakespeare, let's go. And with that, he gets into the boat. Shakespeare raises the sail, and they start their course back to London. Of course, it's a bloody long boat ride. I mean, it's going to take months. A couple of weeks in, Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe are out on the boat in the middle of the sea. They're talking about how they can't believe there was a life before they knew each other and how special their relationship was. And then Christopher Marlowe looks at Shakespeare and says, Will, I suppose I need to tell you why I had to flee London and why it might be so dangerous for me to return. And Shakespeare says, oh, well, I mean, you don't need to. I mean, only when you're ready, but it would be nice to... And then Shakespeare suddenly gags and throws up over the side of the boat. Christopher Marlowe says, Will, are you okay? Is everything all right? Shakespeare is white as a ship's sail. He's sweating profusely. Christopher Marlowe says, Come, quickly, lie down. I'll get you some water. And Shakespeare slowly lies down on the little bed that he and Christopher Marlowe have been sharing the last few weeks. Eventually Marlowe returns with a cup of water and slowly drips it into Shakespeare's mouth. Shakespeare says, Chris, I don't feel so good. Christopher Marlowe says, I know, Shakespeare. I think it must be a tummy bug. And Shakespeare says, I think it might be a bit worse than a tummy bug. But Shakespeare, it can't be. You can't really be that ill. And Shakespeare says, I can't feel my legs. Christopher Marlowe says, oh, that's because I'm sitting on them, sorry. Shakespeare says, oh, that is actually a bit better, thank you. Chris, I might not be with you for much longer. Chris says, no, Shakespeare, you can't leave me now. I'm in love with you. Pass me my quill and my paper. Chris goes over to Shakespeare's quill and paper and ink, brings it over to him. I must write a sonnet before I pass on. And Chris says, no, don't do that. Preserve your energy. You don't need to write me a sonnet. That's fine. Don't worry about the sonnet. I need to. There's much I need to say. Well, just tell me. Just tell me now. Don't worry about the sonnet. Just say it. Just say it in words. No, I want to write a sonnet. And with that, Shakespeare writes Sonnet 71 very, very slowly. It takes him almost 2 days to complete because his writing is so slow because of the lack of energy. Eventually he calls to Chris. Chris! Chris! Chris joins him in the bed. Shakespeare looks worse than ever. He really does look like he's on death's door. Read this. Now. Read it now. And Christopher Marlowe takes the sweat-soaked parchment from Shakespeare's hand and reads Sonnet 71. When I'm dead, only mourn for me as long as you hear the funeral bell telling the world that I am gone from this horrible world to go live with horrible old worms. No, if you read this line, don't remember who wrote it, because I love you so much that I want you to forget me rather than think about me and make yourself all sad. What I'm saying is, if you look at this poem when I'm 6 feet under, don't so much as speak my name, but let your love die with me. Otherwise the wise world will look into why you're sad and use me to mock you after I am gone. So there we have it, Sonnet 71. And just when you thought everything was going well with Shakespeare and Chris, they were leaving Barbados to go back to London to live a beautiful life together, Shakespeare is dying. What the hell is going to happen next? Please, he can't die yet. Not with this beautiful relationship that's blossoming between them. Well, the only way to find out is to tune in next week. Until then, bye.